Okay, we're following up on that aftershock that we just had a couple of minutes ago. It was about it was a 4.21 to be specific, and it's just southeast of the Great Salt Lake is where this hit. We've got Joe Dougherty on the phone with us right now, who's the director of the Utah Division of Emergency Management, on the phone with us right now. I guess good timing, we could say, for the Great Utah Shakeout that you're putting on?
Well, Dan, I got to tell you, for years we have joked about, hey, what if an earthquake actually happened on the day of the shakeout? And this year it actually has come to pass.
And it's the same sort of unsettling and anxiousness, though, as the other day. And I want to ask you, since that one, the 4.2 the other day and now a 4.2 today, still no significance in two of the biggest aftershocks from that original quake a month ago happening just days apart?
Yeah, Carrie, we know there are going to be a lot of rattled nerves and people that are wondering about, what does this mean for Utah? And we have expected that we would see a number of magnitude 4 aftershocks related to the earthquake that we had back in March. And so, yeah, this is definitely not an unexpected event. We know that it's not fun for everybody who is, having their anxiety feelings re-triggered again every time one of these earthquakes happens. But what we really hope people can do is make today your New Year's resolution, that I'm going to, on Shakeout Day, going to start making sure that I'm ready to react appropriately in an earthquake.
So, Joe, you say that you've joked for years about what if an earthquake happens on the day that you have the Great Utah Shakeout. So how does this change things for you today?
Well, we're still in the middle of this pandemic, and so we're not going to see a lot of the same big public drills with schools, evacuating and all those types of things. But this is a day where people can take this and say, hey, we had an earthquake today, and how can we participate virtually? How can maybe teachers who are holding Zoom meetings can do a virtual shakeout drill and teach their students how they can drop to the ground and take cover and hold on under something sturdy. That people who are in bed, if you're in bed when an earthquake hits, stay there, because the most likely injury you would have from an earthquake and severe shaking is from something falling on you. So look around your bedroom. Do you have heavy picture frames? Do you have shelving? Those kinds of things. And now today would be the day to start removing that stuff and putting them somewhere else.
Well, how much longer do you think we're going to be dealing with these aftershocks, and especially if they're going to be sizable, like this 4.2 this morning?
Yeah, so back in March when the 5.7 earthquake happened, we started telling people that we can expect to feel aftershocks for weeks. And so we're only 4 weeks out from the earthquake, and so they can still continue for quite a number of weeks. So Utahns should not be surprised if there are more earthquakes they feel. But just to put these all in context, these are actually pretty light earthquakes. A magnitude 4, we don't ever expect to do damage. And so people can be assured that something of this magnitude is not a large earthquake, even though it feels like they are continuing to happen. So don't be surprised if we still continue to have earthquakes people feel for a number of weeks.
But, Joe, shouldn't they be getting smaller?
So over time, it's a great question. So over time, absolutely, and they have been getting smaller. But what we're going to see is occasionally we're going to see spikes of these earthquakes that are a little bit larger than those magnitude 2s and 3s. Of the roughly 1,200 earthquakes we've had, this is only the 6th one that has been a magnitude 4. All of the hundreds of them have been a magnitude 3 or 2.
Okay, so what does your division do during something like this when you've already got something very major to deal with in the pandemic? With something like this, do you even do anything with a 4.2 aftershock besides talk to us on the phone?
No, you're good. So we expect that there will be quite a number of discussions that we have had multiple aftershocks, although we don't expect to hear any damage reports. From local level, from other buildings, even buildings that dealt really well with the earthquake back in March. There's a very slight possibility that if there was some damage, they could receive a little more damage from something like this. But we expect most other buildings to have fared this earthquake very well today.
What do we learn from these aftershocks? Is this 4.2 and the other aftershocks from our initial quake? Is it like studying a fingerprint? I mean, is it unique what happens with each individual earthquake and the sequence afterwards?
Every earthquake that happens definitely helps paint a picture. For example, when we had some aftershocks last month, some of the aftershock epicenters were a little further east than where the original earthquake happened. And a lot of people were surprised. It seemed like the earthquake was, potentially moving closer to the Wasatch Mountains. And one of the things that we learned was that, the aftershock zone can shift and change over time, even though they're all earthquakes are related to that. All these aftershocks are related to the original quake from March. We did see some unique things happening there that were new for a lot of people in Utah that hadn't experienced very many earthquakes in the past. So I think the things that we're learning, not necessarily what the earthquake scientists are learning, but what the people of Utah are learning, is that we are in an active earthquake zone and that preparedness is just so important now. These are just little reminders that we do have a worst-case scenario earthquake. Our Wasatch Fault is capable of generating a magnitude 7, and a magnitude 7 earthquake would be a truly catastrophic event for our state. And really, most people would even survive something like that. So what kind of preparedness do we want to have? What kind of resilience do we want to have as a state? I want to be someone who is ready to respond and help my family and my neighbors. And so that's why that preparedness is so important.
And we realize this is part of a larger conversation, but you mentioned moving things from around your bed and the places where you spend a lot of time so they don't fall onto you. But what other types of things are you wanting to teach people, especially during the shakeout, about how to be prepared? For a lot of people right now, nerves are a little bit jittery, and so if you're prepared, you don't have to fear as much. So to alleviate some of that fear, how can people prepare? What can they do?
Yeah, we find that little steps to emergency preparedness really will help reduce some of that anxiety that people are feeling. So I'll give you one story. Back in the 1994 Northridge earthquake, one of the most common injuries that was treated was broken glass in people's feet. And so one of the things we recommend to people is put some sturdy shoes by your bed and keep them there. And that way, if you do have to walk around, you have a way of protecting your feet. They're unnecessary injuries that happen from major earthquakes all the time. And you just don't want to be in that level of injury. The other thing is that to make sure that if you have to move around when an earthquake is happening, drop to the ground, because an earthquake can throw you and can knock you down and cause injuries. And a lot of falls and other types of those injuries involve head injuries, which means you're not going to be very able to take care of those around you if you have a severe injury. A lot of people will actually get up and run from their beds and go run to their kids and stuff. And that's another thing we just recommend. Teach your family to stay where they are when that earthquake happens. If everyone is in bed, stay there. It's the best place for you. And then everyone can gather and you can check on your kids.
Joe, besides the size of the earthquake and this aftershock, which is a 4.2, I know you also measure the longevity, how long it lasts. Do we know that information yet about this morning's quake and maybe aftershock, how it compares to the other morning?
Yeah, so for this aftershock, I live up in Davis County. I didn't feel it. My wife felt it. She said it was shaking the bed. And we're hearing reports like that all over the place. So what we would expect is that any shaking really would have lasted just for a handful of seconds for something like this. If you were right near or slightly removed from the epicenter area, you might have felt shaking for, 8 to 10 seconds. It'll be longer for some people, just depending on where you are and how those kind of waves go rolling through the earth. So, I would just expect it would have been just a handful of seconds today.
Okay, and let me ask you this.
That's very similar to the other one.
Very similar to the other morning. I know we've already gone over this before, but for maybe viewers that are listening now and not the other morning, how do we know today's quake was an aftershock and not a new earthquake?
Yeah, this is a really common question, is what's the difference between an aftershock and a main shock? The main shock earthquake happened March 18th. Every earthquake that is happening in that general area afterward, we call an aftershock. And aftershocks are still classified as earthquakes, just to put them in their relationship to the original quake. you look at what is the general area where those are happening. And since March 18th, we have had about 1,200 aftershocks. Like we said earlier, this is the sixth one that is a magnitude 4. Most of the other ones have been magnitude 3s, 2s, 1s, and even less than 1. So the Earth continues to move even though we aren't aware of most of those aftershocks that are happening. And it's just part of living in an active seismic area. That's Utah. We have faults all over the place. In fact, we created a website that's a resource for people to learn about the geology here in Utah. You can go to earthquakes.utah.gov, and you can read about the geology of the magna earthquake and what that has meant for Utah and